Hey guys, this is Mr. Champlin. Today we're going to be talking about the different groups of flatworms. So remember that Platyhelminthes is the phylum name, so we're going to be talking about three different groups or three different classes of flatworms. So the first group or class is Turbularia, and so the example that you might want to remember from this is the Planaria, and that's that sort of cross-eyed looking worm that we saw in videos. Now, a few things about these. They are meat eating. They are carnivorous, and they have that extensible, pharynx, which is, again, we described it kind of like a miniature elephant trunk, and that's sort of where they suck in their food. They are definitely free living, which is to say they are not parasites. So again, they live in all kinds of fresh water. And there are, of course, many types of examples in this particular group or class that live in the ocean. As we already mentioned with the planaria, many of them have the ventral cilia. So in other words, on the stomach sort of side, they have the cilia, and it enables them to kind of glide along a layer of slime. So not that different from something like a snail or something like that. And also, especially the ones that live in the ocean, they swim using simple muscular movement. Okay, so this is sort of an example of the planaria. So we've already kind of seen that. We've already talked about that as sort of like the classic example of a flatworm or a platyhelminthes. Here's some other ones. So again, the right-hand corner, we have the planaria. And then here are some other examples. This is an example here of a flatworm from this particular group that lives in the tropical rainforest. And so because it is moist there, they're able to do that. And then on the top here, these two worms are examples of turbularians that live in the ocean. So again, as we sort of mentioned, they're very brightly colored, and they move along with these simple muscular movements. So the second group that we're going to talk about are the class Trematoda. These are often called flukes. That's sort of their common name. And schistosoma is an example of this. These are blood flukes, so these actually live in the veins of the urinary tract. Sounds pleasant? As you might have guessed, that's not sort of where normally where worms should live. And as you might have guessed, these are parasites. So all of the worms that are in this particular group or this class, Trematoda, these are all parasites. Now they look like the planarians. They look like the sort of worms we've already seen, except they don't have those little cute cross eyes. But they're very similar in structure. Just by looking at them, they look like just flatworms. But because they are parasites, they have a highly specialized existence. And one of the things that they have that you won't see in the other worms is they have special adhesive organs or suckers that help them to attach to their prey or their host. And what we see with all parasites is they have very complicated life cycles. Now, I'm not sure why this is, but this is a thing that we see, again, very commonly in parasites. Now, how do you get these flukes or these trematodes? Well, they can come from poorly cooked fish and shellfish. So this is one of the things that people have to be really cautious when you're dealing with sushi. So of course, sushi is raw fish. So when the fishermen catch the fish, if they indeed are planning on using the fish for sushi, they have to put it on ice right away. They have to do something to prepare the fish so that it's safe. Because what you don't want to happen is for these flukes to move from some parts of the fish to other parts of the fish so that they're eaten by people and then can infect people. But my guess is that actually infections from poorly cooked fish or shellfish are really uncommon because typically we cook our food. But Water is a very common route. Now, luckily for us, these parasites don't live around here. But in many warm parts of the world where it's tropical or semi-tropical, if you go into the water and the water is dirty and it has these parasites in it, they can actually burrow through your skin. Okay, so a little bit more about the flukes and their life cycle. So again, we said that they are parasitic worms. They're all parasites, and they have very complicated life cycles. So here's what I mean by a complicated life cycle. So let's start here. So we have a male and a female worm that actually mate inside their human host. So the worms are having sex inside you, and then the eggs then leave the human's body, usually through feces. And then the eggs hatch and you get these larvae which have cilia, and the larvae will then infect snails. So this is called an intermediate or a secondary host. And then eventually the larva will then leave the snail. You can see here they look more like worms. They can swim a bit. And then what happens is when people are outside in this water that has these larvae in it, and presumably, human feces, they will bore in through the soles of the feet or into the legs to get into the host. Now, again, we don't have to worry about these. These particular flukes live in Southeast Asia, and as you can see here, this guy's working in a rice paddy. So obviously, we wouldn't have these kinds of flukes around here. Also, we try to be very careful about human feces and sort of how we process it. So again, this is one of the reasons, is because human feces can pass on all kinds of parasites, including things like flukes. So this is very, very common for the flukes to have an intermediate host. And in this case, it's the snails, but it could be, could be pigs, it could be other animals in the environment. So again, very complicated life cycle. So here are some pictures of some flukes, so you can kind of get an idea of what they look like. So here's one down here. Here's a fluke, and you can't really see it too well, but this is the head region, and underneath the head region, you would have those suckers. In fact, I think you can kind of see it like right there. Which helps it to attach to the host. And then, of course, these are the larvae that we talked about that can swim in the water. Again, this would be in water that has been made dirty by human feces or feces from other animals. So again, this is why we don't fertilize our fields with human feces, because they could contain parasites like flukes. All right, and the third and last group that you should know for the flatworms is class Cestoda, and these are the tapeworms. And I'm sure you've heard of tapeworms before. And also, like the flukes, these guys are all parasites. These guys are all parasites. And what's interesting about these guys is that really they've lost a lot of the features that a lot of the other flatworms have. For example, they don't have a digestive tract. They have no digestive tract. Now, at first that may seem odd, but when you think about it, if they're living inside the human's intestine, they don't have to digest food because the human does it for them. So they just basically absorb the nutrients through their skin. So again, many of their body systems, if not all their body systems, have virtually disappeared. The only thing that is really well developed is the reproductive system. And of course, if you're an animal and you're living inside a human or another animal, and you're trying to reproduce, you're going to have a little bit of a different strategy than most animals. Okay, so the third and last group are the tapeworms, as I mentioned. And this particular species right here, this is actually a tapeworm that infects rabbits, of all things. Now, there are many, many different species of tapeworms, and they all infect different species. Some infect pigs, some infect cattle, some infect rabbits. There's all different kinds. Now, what's interesting about these guys is similar to the last group, they do have some suckers that help them to attach to their prey, but they also have lots of hooks. So the head region is called the scolex, and on the scolex it has lots of hooks and suckers to help to attach to the inside of the intestine of their host. Because when you think about it, your intestine, part of its job is to move the food through your digestive system. So it's constantly contracting and moving the food through your gut. So in order for the worm to not pass out of the host body with the feces, it needs to kind of hook onto the inside of the intestine. So that's what it does with the scolex. And after the scolex, we have this region that's sometimes called the neck, and it's made up of immature proglottids. Now, proglottids, this is a very weird word, but proglottids are these rectangular structures that come after the scolex. And as we get further and further away from the scolex, they get bigger and bigger, and until we get to the end where they actually will be filled with eggs. So the proglottids are interesting, again, in the sense that they don't really have any body systems that we would normally see in animals, but they do have reproductive organs. So they have actually both male and female reproductive organs. So again, this makes sense. If you're a tapeworm living inside a pig, for example, what's the chances that you're going to come across another tapeworm inside that same pig, and so you can mate? And it's probably pretty close to zero. It's highly unlikely. So in this case, they will just fertilize themselves because they have both male and female sex organs. Again, as the proglottids sort of move down the body, they become mature, and they will self-fertilize, and then they will produce eggs and sperm, and then they will fertilize those eggs. So once you get to the very end of the tapeworm, this is what would be where the ripe proglottids would be found, and these would contain the fertilized eggs, or the zygotes. And these zygotes would then leave in the feces. So when the person or the animal defecates, they would leave with the feces, and it could contain thousands or even tens of thousands of eggs in each of these proglottids. If you have a cat and your cat has worms, you can sometimes actually see these things in the cat feces if you inspect them closely. I don't recommend it, but if you're really bored, that's something you can do. Is you can look in your cat box and see if your cat actually has tapeworms, or maybe even roundworms, which are another common pet issue. All right, so here's kind of what it looks like. So again, here is the scolex, or the head region, and notice it's got suckers on the side, and on the top here lots of hooks to attach. So it's going to attach to the inside of the intestinal wall, and you can see these proglottids. Each one of these sort of sections is a proglottid until you get to the very, very end, which these would be the ones that would break off and would be filled with fertilized eggs. Here's some actual pictures of some tapeworms. So again, here's a picture of the proglottid, obviously under a microscope. So here's your hooks, here's your suckers. This is actually a dog tapeworm. I have a dog tapeworm at school. Obviously can't show you that, but we actually have some of these tapeworms. And here's one, you can see it up close, and you can see the inside of the proglottid is filled with eggs. All these little circles are eggs, and these are the pores that allow the sperm to enter into the a proglottid and to fertilize the eggs. So again, like all parasites, they have these kind of complicated life cycles. There are many types of tapeworms, but humans, the ones that we would get would be from eating animals, or eating animals have been infected and the meat's not thoroughly cooked. So for example, a beef tapeworm, you would get that by eating beef that was undercooked. So this is why when I go to a restaurant, I always want it well done, because I don't want to take any chances. And once the larvae get inside you, of course, they can grow. And they can grow as long as your intestine. Now, if you don't really remember from Bio 1, the human intestine is in an adult is usually between 25 and 30 feet long. So these tapeworms can grow that long. They can grow, up to 30 feet long. Of course, the eggs from the ripe or the fertilized proglodids, the fertilized eggs, can leave in the feces, and then if that feces were to end up in water, and that water we used to water grass, let's say, then the cows could then ingest the eggs, and then what happens is the larvae will insist, or they will burrow into the muscle, which is what you eat. When you eat a steak or ribs or whatever, you're eating the muscle. And so they kind of form a cyst or a protective sort of covering, and they can be eaten again by the next person. Now, in this country, of course, the meat is inspected by the FDA, and they inspect the meat and they stamp it to show that it's been inspected. But again, you should always eat meat that's been thoroughly cooked, because what if an inspector is having a bad day and he misses something? So as you can see, a lot of these parasites, these flatworm parasites, are caused by feces, mixing with water and mixing with food and stuff. So again, this is why we invest so heavily in having water that's clean, and making sure that human feces is properly processed and doesn't end up near livestock, or we don't just dump it into streams and rivers and lakes. So in many parts of the world, they don't have the luxury of having clean water or access to these kinds of things. So it's a much greater problem. But here in this country, I think it's fairly rare. I have heard of people, if you look on YouTube, there are videos of people that intentionally will swallow these tapeworms and allow the tapeworms to grow inside them so that they can lose weight. This is obviously not something that a doctor would tell you to do, and it can be dangerous. But if you did get infected with some kind of tapeworm, or some other flatworm that was a parasite, they could give you some kind of medicine that would kill it, and then of course it would just leave your body when you were to use the bathroom. So it's not unheard of here in this country, but it's fairly rare. It's not one of those things that you're gonna commonly see. Also, I should mention too that in this country, we have plenty of food and water. So if you were to get one of these, you may not even notice. But let's say you're a person from South America or Africa, and you didn't have a lot of access to food, and you were eating just one bowl of rice per day, and then if you had a tapeworm on top of that, that would of course put a lot more stress on your body, and it would have a much greater effect on your overall health. Whereas for us, usually not getting enough calories is not a problem for most people that live in this country.